All right. Hello. Welcome. We are live. Let me set up Instagram a little better. Here we go. All right. Welcome to another edition of the Wednesday Writing Workshop. For those of you who don't know me, I am Sarah L. Webb. I am the creator of Colorism Healing, the page on which you are viewing this live. So the Wednesday Writing Workshop is to talk about colorism healing through the lens or the approach of creative writing, of literacy, of reading, of discussions. And so the workshops vary from week to week. Sometimes we are very oriented towards the writing and the tactics of grammar and sentence structure. And then some weeks we talk more about the big picture issues of healing, big picture issues of colorism. This week is a very special week. I'll get more into that. But before we get started, make sure you say hello, especially if this is your first time joining. Make sure that you let me know where you're tuning in from, that sort of thing. Hello, welcome to the folks on Instagram. So a couple of things. You are invited to a very special event. For those of you who don't know, I host an international writing contest. Hey, Sienna, one of those people has just joined on Instagram. And so we are releasing their anthology for that in June. There will be a live book launch featuring many of the authors who've contributed to the book. And that'll be June 26th. It's a Friday at noon. So I hope you can tune in. That's a big announcement going forward. This week, we're going to talk about reflecting and recording. So the idea of reflecting and recording, right? So we're going into summertime, right? We're just transitioning to Gemini season, right? I'm a Gemini. My birthday's coming up in a few days, couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that. But I want to take this time, right, where people are graduating, people are wrapping up the school year, wrapping up the semester, and transitioning into different seasons to talk about the idea of recording things and reflecting on things, okay? Gemini, are you a Gemini too? June 6th, that's my birthday. Hey, Jendelle on Facebook, glad y'all are tuning in. So when is your birthday? Do we have any other Geminis watching? Happy belated birthdays to all the Tauruses out there. Oh, May 28th. So yours is coming up even sooner. Oh no, Sienna's a Gemini too. We have two Geminis on Instagram watching. Woo woo. All right. Hey, see, I knew I was attracting that Gemini vibe into my live stream. Welcome Armando Rivera. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining. So we're going to get started in just a second. I was just recapping, explaining to people what the Wednesday writing workshops are all about, making the announcement for the book launch on June 26th, Friday. Yes, we are the bomb, Geminis. And if anyone has a birthday today, happy birthday to you as well. So this session is really, really special. Last week, I talked about talking about colorism to kids. Hola, abrazos, y tú. My Spanish is very rusty. So last week's session on talking to kids about colorism, I said I was inspired by something my 6-year-old niece said. She told me to talk about what's on the inside. So I've been here in Texas visiting with family, and since quarantine started, I had been doing virtual library times with them, right? And so I came here and we were able to do like in-person library times since they weren't actually able to go to the real library. So they've been wanting to come on live and say hello to you all. So I'm going to bring them on live this week to get to say hello to you and talk about virtual library time and what they liked about it, some of the things that they learned. And maybe that's something we can continue next year. Oh, here they are. They're ready. Come on, y'all. Hey, say hello. So this is Malaika and this is JC.
Hi.
Say hello to everyone. So Harry African, I see your question. I'm going to come right back to that. I will answer it before we log off. So again, this is my niece and my nephew, Malaika and JC. Hey, look, they're saying, what's up? So why don't you all tell them your names and ages?
My name is JC Crutchfield and I'm 8 years old. My name is Molly Ika Crutchfield and I'm 6 years old.
That's right. And who am I?
Aunt Sarah.
Aunt Sarah. Yes. So I've been telling people that we were doing virtual library time. I'm going to let the people on Instagram see you, JC. So people on Instagram, this is my nephew. Let's see if there's a way to get both of them on there. You just have to squeeze in. Okay. So tell them about virtual library time and some of the things that we did on that. Malika, can you go get those papers on the edge of the table right there? Thank you. So JC, you want to start telling people what we did in virtual library time?
Yes. So we got on call with Aunt Sarah and then we talked about some reading words and vocabulary stuff.
Yes, so reading words and vocabulary words. So a lot like what I do with the Wednesday writing workshop. We talk about reading and writing and vocabulary and poetry. Here, that's that. There was one special session. Malik, would you like to read and give your perspective on virtual library time?
I've written about Auntie Sarah and what we do and what I love about it.
Okay, so what's some of the things you liked?
Being with her and her teaching us and her helping us learn more stuff.
That's right. Excellent. Okay, show them that. Why are you on what?
This side and this side.
Oh.
And also there.
Yeah, so that's a journal prompt. What does that journal prompt talk about?
It talks about what we've learned in Virtual Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. And what's this word right here?
Empire.
Empire. We talked about African empires. What else did we talk about? You know what that word is?
Where?
Right there.
Melanin.
We talked about melanin, right? So African empires and melanin. So obviously, you know, if I'm doing virtual library time, I'm going to be talking about the history of Black people in the world stemming from the continent of Africa. We're going to be talking about things like melanin and learning to love our melanin and what melanin means, right? Yes, she wants everybody to see JC. So what's one thing you learned about melanin, JC?
Who?
JC.
One thing I learned about melanin is it's what darkens your skin.
That's right.
And it protects you from the sun.
And it protects you from the sun. That's right. So melanin is not something that we need to be ashamed of or scared of, right? So it has a purpose, a really positive purpose, right? And then tell them what this is, Malika.
We worked on a project and it was about my mirror.
My mirror. Can you show it to the camera? Yes. So the My Mirror worksheets, for those of you who are not aware, I create worksheets and things like that for kids. And so I use that for one of their virtual library times. And so some of the things that we say on the mirror, do you want to read the first sentence?
We say, I see me, my face, and love.
Okay, read what yours says.
When I look in the mirror, I see creativity, bravery, and intelligence.
That's right. So when we look in our mirrors, what do we see? We see ourselves, we see love, we see creativity, we see bravery and intelligence, right? So
change that.
Yes, you can change it. You can update it at any time. So these are some of the things that we are recording, right, and reflecting on for virtual library time. Do you all have any questions for Malaika and JC? Anyone who's watching or tuning in? Hey, Amanda, nice to see y'all on Facebook. And Jandelle says y'all are really cute. Of course, Jandelle is biased because that's my sister, AKA their mommy. Yes, y'all mom thinks y'all are cute. So again, recording and reflecting, I wanted to have them come on for a change for once because I talk about them all the time. I refer to them. in my lives. They inspire a lot of my work, right, around, again, the worksheets, the workbooks that I do for children their age. I always think about them when I'm creating materials for kids. So they said, well, you won't just use this for inspiration. We want to show our faces too, so that the people in your community can know what we look like when you say our names. So Jandel on Facebook says, do you all like writing? JC, do you like writing?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. Malika, do you like writing?
Yes.
Yes? What do you like to write?
I like to write about what I usually do and about what I did afterwards.
Before. So you like to record and reflect on things, right? Yes. JC, are you ready to leave? You ready to say goodbye?
I'm trying to find something. But yeah.
Okay, so we're going to close out this part of the live stream, and I'm going to get into the writing prompts for you all and go back and answer some of the questions that you all had earlier. So what do y'all want to say to the crowd watching? I'm going to say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Say thank y'all for watching.
Thanks for watching.
All right. Thank y'all for joining me on that live. So yes, you get a sneak peek into a big reason why I do the work I do. I do the kind of work that I do. So that was a cute example of reflecting on a phase of life, right? A season or a semester, right? Whatever it is for you, and also having documentation, recording what that is, right? And so I kind of want to give you guys some journal prompts and some reflective writing practices that you can use. I'm thinking about even reflecting on what quarantine has been like. And even though we're still in it, right? It's not fully over, but we've been in it long enough to have thought about what it means for us, right? To kind of think about its impact in our lives. Before I jump into that, though, there was a question here from Harry African that I want to say. And if you want me to use a different name than what's your screen name, let me know. Scroll back up. Okay, and so he asked, in your opinion, are Black men more colorist than Black women? I think I would say not necessarily. I think Black men have been more vocal, right? Because there is a gender dynamic to colorism, right? There is still patriarchy and sexism that affects Black people as well. So for example, in the media, a lot of Black men are darker skinned, right? You also have a lot of successful light skinned men in the media, right? You have the Will Smiths, you have the Jesse Williamses and people like that, Terrence Howards, Boris Kujos, right? So I think men have a different struggle when it comes to colorism. And so in terms of who's perpetuates it more, who's more colorist, I think because we see men more, because we hear more men's voices, we just hear men's opinions more than we hear women's opinions, right? But I think mothers, for example, mothers can be just as colorist, right? And telling their children not to play in the sun. They can be just as colorist with, wanting their child to have a certain texture of hair, right? So I don't think that men are more colorist. I think they just sometimes have bigger platforms than women. And so their colorist views might get spread more. But in my everyday life, I don't have any reason to believe that we see it more in men, right? I think women are just as likely to prefer light skin, are just as likely to want their children to be lighter, right? Or to marry someone so that their kids come out a certain way. I hope that answers your question. You can respond back and let me know if I have or have not. Moya Rush, Moya. I'm just gonna say Moya. I don't know how to pronounce the last name exactly, but she says yes. Amanda asks on Facebook, how can I get these worksheets? So they are on colorismhealing.com. If you click on shop or go to the bookstore, they are sold individually. And then there's also like a workbook where you can get several worksheets combined. And And if you have trouble finding it, just DM me. I can send you a direct link. Amanda, thank you for asking. Any other questions? I love answering questions, actually. So I have, prepared agendas for all my live sessions, but I really like answering questions. I've been answering comment questions on TikTok and that sort of thing. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so in terms of your own recording and reflection, right, like Malaika and JC just did with virtual library time, I think you can first decide what you're reflecting on, right? Are you reflecting on the school year? Are you looking back and saying, okay, how was the school year? How has it been? What have my struggles been? Are you reflecting on your time in quarantine? Are you reflecting on an old relationship? Are you reflecting on a job or a promotion, right? Or an anniversary or some sort? Right? We have a lot of Geminis in the chats. We have birthdays coming up. So we might be reflecting on the anniversary of our births, thinking about how far we've come at this point. And then, so the other question is, do you ever think we will get off the colorist mindset? I think individually, small groups of us will move forward. I don't know if society or the global society will ever not be colorist, but I think we can definitely see progress. And more acceptance, right? So I think we can tip the scale against colorism. I don't think we'll ever see like 0% colorism, but I do think we can tip the scale down the line in generations to come so that less people are colorist and the majority of people are not colorist. But that is going to require like a lot of work, right? And the thing is that even if racism goes away, even if we make progress on other things, colorism, I think, would linger even past getting rid of racism. And people say that racism will never end, right? But I do also think that we can put systems and structures in place to where even if there's colorism in the world, we have justice for people who experience it, right? We have means of rectifying or healing from it when it happens, right? So just like people will always commit crimes, there will always be crimes of some sort, but we can put systems in place to where you can get retribution or you can get justice if a crime has been committed against you. I think that's also something to look for in terms of progress on colorism, is that even if it still exists, what do we have in place to compensate for it? Or what do we have in place to make sure that if discrimination happens, we can rectify it? So in thinking about even colorism, for example, actually, if we want to make it a macro conversation and something that we can reflect on, we can look at where we've been as a culture when it comes to colorism, right? In this country specifically, in the United States, we can reflect back on the period of colorism that we've been in, right? So in addition to all the other areas of life that we might reflect on, I think collectively it's important to reflect on how far have we come when it comes to colorism, right? Where were we 100 years ago? Where were we 50 years ago? And where are we now? Where do we plan to go in the future? So that's the first thing, right? Is there a process or a specific thing that you need to learn from, right? Or a period or phase in your life that you want to learn lessons from, that you need to learn lessons from? Oh, so he says, sorry, what does rectify mean? So rectify means to correct the situation, right? So if I get discriminated against at work for being a dark-skinned woman, then there's an avenue I can go to have that corrected or have justice served, right? So you can't fire me for wearing an afro, for example. So that would be rectifying the situation. Great question, great question. Hello, welcome to everyone who's joining. We're talking about recording and reflecting on various things, including how far we've come or not on the issue of colorism. And that's actually something someone asked me on my TikTok live on Tuesday, right? Is whether or not I think colorism is worse now than it was in the past, right? I don't think it's worse now. I think it's more visible now just because we have more media, we have more visibility of everything. So the world in general is online, is on TV more than ever before. You think 50 years ago, there were only maybe a handful of channels, TV channels people watched. And now you have hundreds of TV channels to choose from. right? So I think the issues were always there. I think we just have more media that is exposing things that always existed. Thank you. Thank you for that. You seem very sweet. Much power. Love y'all. So the other thing in terms of reflecting, right, is to compare and contrast. So I've already kind of been saying that, right? Comparing and contrasting where we are now on a situation, again, whether it be where you are now with your learning or with your educational journey, where you are now with your healing journey, where you are now with changing your colorist mindset, right? And so I think too, in terms of colorism healing, it's okay if you recognize that you have had colorist attitudes in the past, right? It's okay if you recognize that you're still dealing with negative perceptions of people with darker skin, right? Or if you're still segregating amongst yourselves as Black people. It's okay to recognize that. In fact, it's necessary to recognize that. It's necessary to recognize any hangups that you might still have, right? It's necessary to recognize any biases that you might have, right? So you're not a bad person or a negative person because you say, oh man, like I really did, bully these kids in school. I really did tease these kids in school, right? The more important thing is that you now see that. And then what are you going to do once you recognize it? What are you going to do once you see it, right? And so reflecting on where you've been, where you've come, what you've learned, and how you might plan for the future is important. That's a big part of colorism healing. And then thinking about what the best of it was and the worst of it was, right? So having compassion along the way, and realizing that even if the situation was negative or less than positive in some way, that there's still a potential to learn from that, right? There's still a lot of good that can come from the difficult or the hard-won lessons. But also taking that time to acknowledge what you have done right? Taking that time to acknowledge or just applaud yourself even for being willing to look at yourself, even being willing to reflect on what you need to learn and what you may still need to work on. And then actually articulating what those lessons are and realizing there's a difference between becoming aware of what you need to know and then actually going through the process of learning it. Does that make sense? So people say, oh, I keep making the same mistake over and over again, right? That's because the moment that we recognize something is not necessarily the moment when we master that activity or we master that lesson, right? Or we master that habit, right? So that can take time. And I think it's important to record again and document your process of these things, right? Record your healing process, document your healing journey, right? So that you can, in a month from now, 6 months from now, go back and actually know, okay, yes, that was my attitude 6 months ago, right? And now I can finally not be ashamed of my natural hair, or now I can finally see the beauty in someone of a different color or someone of the same color as me, right? Yeah, so Harry African on Instagram saying I had biases toward light-skinned girls before, right? And that's something that I hear a lot of men say. Even Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? When I first started blogging, I read an article by Ta-Nehisi Coates, famous writer, famous author, wrote Between the World and Me and that kind of thing. He talked about a similar issue with himself growing up and saying, well, I prefer light-skinned girls. And his mom, who happened to be a light-skinned woman, corrected him on that, right? So he was writing a blog post reflecting on his process of realizing that he had a bias and then sort of unlearning it over time. Moya says, doing a little research into colorism and the civil rights movement was eye-opening. There is a lot to take into account. We need to hear this conversation. Thank you for creating this space. Yes, definitely. It's interesting because the civil rights movement was seen as also this period when people were becoming really proud to be Black and really being vocal about being Black and proud. And yet there was still a lot of colorism going on. So you're absolutely right. And thank you for sharing that research. If you see anything interesting, send it to me in a DM or tag me in it. I would love to see what you're finding as well. But I think that's the paradox, right? Or the the two sides of the coin in the Black community and the African American community is that even in spaces where there's a lot of like Black pride or African American pride, we can still perpetuate colorism a lot. And in terms of reflecting on our history, right, as Black people, thinking about Black history, whether it's Black History Month or Black History 365, that's one of the things that we have to document and reflect on, right? What is it that's going to help us break that cycle, right? People say, why are we still dealing with colorism in 2020? I think a lot of it has to do because we aren't really reflecting on the past. We aren't really reflecting on how we got here and why we're still here. Let's see, Stephanie Jackson on Facebook is saying, so when I had my baby, I actually chopped my hair to be natural because I wanted her to be proud of who she is. Question, is it possible to go the other extreme of like Black love, if that makes sense? So Stephanie Jackson says she reflected upon having her child, again, like these milestone moments, right? And she cut her hair to kind of inspire and role model for her child, you know, what it means to love yourself and to love your natural hair, your natural appearance. I think that's a beautiful point. And Jandel says, great question, Steph. And is it possible to go the other extreme, like with Black love, if that makes sense? I'm assuming when you say the other extreme with Black love, that are you, let me ask, let me not assume. So I'm going to ask you, Stephanie, and please clarify if you can. Do you mean telling other people that they don't love themselves if they aren't natural? Is that the kind of extreme you mean? Or making it become really exclusive, like I have to be as Black as possible, or if my hair isn't 4C hair, then I'm not Black enough, right? Is that kind of what you mean, Stephanie? And if that's the case, then yes, I think it is possible to go to extremes with it, right? For example, my niece and nephew were just on the call, right? And I'm darker than them. And so I wouldn't say it's in terms of uplifting melanin, right? I want them to see that they are still beautiful despite the fact that I have more melanin than them, right? So I don't want it to become a competition in the opposite direction. But clarify for me and let me know if I'm on the right track in terms of, okay, so you're saying no. So Stephanie on Facebook is saying no, more like wanting to hang around more Black people. I don't know if that's extreme. So I wouldn't call that extreme, wanting to hang around more Black people. And especially because it's even that question itself, wanting to hang around more Black people, suggests that for Black people, one, we might be in spaces where we don't see ourselves often enough. We don't see ourselves in leadership roles enough, right? We don't, even in classrooms, we don't have peers that we can look to. We don't have coworkers that we can look to, right? So I think even the question of wanting to hang around more Black people comes from a place of needing to repair the damage of being isolated sometimes as a Black person, needing more affirming friendships, more affirming relationships, right? More mirrors of ourselves, more mirrors of people who have similar cultural experiences as we do, right? So I don't think it's an extreme to want to be around more Black people more often, because in a culture like American culture, we're so often deprived of that, right? We're so often deprived of being able to just take for granted our Blackness, right? And white people will oftentimes be in spaces where it's like 100 white people, and they will not think negatively of it at all, right? It won't even register to them that they're in a room full of 100 people and everyone's white, you know? Very rarely will Black people get to take that for granted just because of American culture and what it's like. Jandel says we definitely need the reinforcement from reflections of ourselves. Absolutely. I'm going to turn, so Instagram is flying with the comments. I'm going to read some of these for the folks on Facebook who can't see the Instagram comments. So Moya says, yes, doing a little research, says, can I ask, what would you say are some of the bridges that can be built or supported by lighter skinned or mixed Black people? So I think that's a great question, Moya. And I hope you're still watching because I'm just getting to your question now. But I'll ask the question again. What would you say are some of the bridges that can be built or supported by lighter skinned or mixed Black people? You're welcome, Stephanie. So my sister and I just made a TikTok about that, related to that, because my sister is several shades lighter than I am. And she has often talked about standing in the gap, right? Or building those bridges, right? And actually, in some sibling relationships or friendships, there's a tendency to have friction or conflict or jealousy or pettiness, right? But we were able to avoid that by knowing what our experiences were, but also seeing a best friend who was a different skin tone, right? And so for me, because I know my sister and I know what she's like, I never looked at light-skinned women as the quote unquote enemy, right? Or I never saw myself in competition with light-skinned women or felt like I couldn't be friends with the light-skinned women. But that's because of who my sister is, right? Because she did not accept the colorist comments, right? She did not associate with people who rejected me because of my dark skin, right? So I think that's a big one, is not tolerating hatred for the darker or the lighter, right? Because then that showed me that we were in fact bonded, right? That she was not buying into the hierarchy that society placed on us. And because she didn't buy into the hierarchy where people would call her pretty and ignore me, right? Because she didn't accept that or, try to play that role of being the cuter sister or being the smarter sister or being the more popular sister, then that helped us to have a strong bond, right? And that helped me to not reject other light-skinned women, So that's one way. That's one thing. And I might bring her on. She and I should actually do a live together where we talk more about that, right? So Jendelle, since you're watching, put that on your schedule. We're gonna do a live together where we talk about allyship and building bonds among Black women of different skin tones. Another question. I was wondering why most of the ministers in Nation of Islam were all light skinned. They are what I would consider a pro-Black group. So I'm not an expert on the Nation of Islam, but I think in my analysis of a lot of leadership roles in the civil rights movements, a lot of civil rights leaders and icons were lighter skinned. And that there are various reasons for that. One, right, if you look at the correlation between, for example, education and skin tone, right, there is a correlation between lighter skin and having more education, right? There's also the argument that they were more palatable for the mainstream media, right? So you think about someone like a Martin Luther King, who is not the lightest skinned African-American, but still not very dark either, right? And how even Angela Davis, for example, right? So the media at the time, which was controlled and dominated by white people, it's possible that they gravitated towards lighter skinned Blacks, right, as leaders, right? So putting lighter skinned Blacks at the forefront of movements of various kinds, in a way, gave them more visibility in mainstream society, right? Because that's what the mainstream would find more appealing. There's various arguments, but then also like the earlier comments by Moya, talking about there was still colorism in the civil rights movement, right? Just like there were a lot of Black civil rights leaders who only dated white women, right? And so there's problematic instances of that whole time period, right? Not just in the Nation of Islam, but a lot of leaders during that time. And even today, if we're honest, right, there is still colorism even amongst pro-Black movements, right? And a lot of times the attitude of, well, we have to talk about racism first because that's more important than colorism, I think is a move to sort of hide that, right? We try to sweep colorism under the rug. Certain people do. right? By saying that racism is a more important topic and you're just being divisive and we need to be united and we can't talk about colorism because it'll divide us and we need to just focus on racism and getting rid of white supremacy, right? And I think that kind of attitude is meant in part to hide the colorism that still exists even amongst civil rights leaders and pro-Black movements. Amando, have you seen any cross-collaboration African-American and Latinx colorism efforts? I have, Armando. Thank you, Armando, sorry. Actually, well, I'll say this. So my writing contest is international, right? And my project assistant this year is Diana Vasquez, who is of Mexican descent. So that's just a plug for the International Colorism Healing Writing Contest and the book that's coming out. And I do think that there have been, for example, like Bell Hooks and Amelia Bessa Baines, right, have co-authored like conversational books where they talk about colorism, but lots of things in terms of African-American culture and Mexican-American culture in particular. Those are the two that come to mind immediately. I don't know if there have been any other like major projects necessarily, but I definitely see conversations and discussions that are cross-cultural between African-American and Latinx communities, right? Those are the two projects, my writing contest and then the Bell Hooks and Amelia Mesa Baines book. I think it's called Homegrown. I had some of my students read that a couple of years ago. Two tangible things, right, that demonstrate the cross-cultural dialogue. But I definitely see the interactions on social media. I definitely see the interactions online and even in the communities, right? On my campus at the University of Illinois in Springfield, the Diversity Center is really diverse. And so the Hispanic and Latinx students and the African-American students and the international students, they are very, very integrated in terms of their efforts for diversity, which is, something that even like at LSU, when I was at LSU, I didn't see very often. So I am seeing those dialogues happen, not necessarily in a formal project or a formal initiative, but fortunately, I do see a lot of cultures interacting online, but also like in physical spaces, like on college campuses. Harry African says, an FYI, I hate when Black people clown each other for their natal hair, nappy hair. That whole good hair versus bad hair discussion is sickness. I agree. I think your hair as it naturally grows out of your head should not be stigmatized in the least. I don't see any other questions coming through. So I'm gonna wrap it up. So I usually try to keep these to 30 minutes just to be mindful of time, my time and your time. Sorry, I will read Stephanie's comment on Facebook because it looks juicy. So Stephanie says, never really thought about it growing up. I'm probably the same shade as you. My white peers would always say you're pretty for a Black girl. Never really thinking about until I got older and learned I wanted to protect my daughter from that. It's probably caused some wounds on how I approach certain things now. Would you agree? This is awesome. Never thought about colorism. Stephanie Jackson. I definitely can see how it would cause wounds because I know I can speak from my own wounds, how that influences and impacts things that I've experienced and the way I do things now and what I do now. And you're absolutely right. I know I've heard that before. A lot of Black people saying that because they went to mostly white schools and they didn't have a lot of interaction with Black people of various shades, especially in their, formative years, that they hadn't thought much about colorism or as much about colorism. And I can see why that would be the case because in a mostly white space, it is the racial category that gets pushed to the forefront more so than the color category. I definitely think even in movies, for example, if there's an all Black cast in the movie, it's easier to see the colorism, right? Versus in a predominantly white movie with just one Black person in it. You might not really be as aware of the colorism because there's just one Black person. So it's harder to compare skin tones. So that's a media example of kind of what you're talking about in the real world, going to majority white schools and that kind of thing. I do think like with my sister and I, for example, I think that helped me be aware of colorism at an earlier age, because I did have someone who was a different skin tone, the same race, but a different skin tone, right? So that's one of the reasons why I was aware of it at an early age. But even the white people we would interact with would treat us differently, right? So it wasn't just other Black people doing the colorism, but even white people would prefer my sister over me because she was lighter, right? And they might have thought she was biracial or something like that. You have to see our TikTok video, Steph. We addressed that very comment. All right, y'all. So I'm going to close out with some affirmations, as I always do, some homework and some affirmations. And I will see y'all next week. I hope you all can join. This was great. A lot of questions. I love it. I'm so excited. Okay, so the homework is to record and reflect. Record and reflect on situations in your life or periods in your life that you can learn from. Also, record and reflect culturally, right? So I really like this conversation about where we've come as a culture when it comes to colorism, right? So documenting, looking into, right, Moya, who was studying the civil rights movement, like we really as a people, as a society, need to look back and see what we can learn from the past so that we can start to make more progress on issues like colorism and racism and classism and things like that. And then the affirmation is that I can take what I need from the past and let go of the rest, right? So the civil rights movement had a lot of problems in it. The Black is Beautiful movement even had a lot of problems in it, right? But we can take the positive, the excellent pieces of those histories, and we can move forward and learn from the lessons that maybe we didn't get right at the time, okay? And then also, I look forward to my future is the last affirmation. I look forward to my future. I have the power to create it, right? And I say I, but I want you to say that to yourself, right? You can say that to yourself. Thank you for not bashing all Black men when you talk about colorism. Absolutely, I love Black men. I love Black people. Shout out to my brother and my uncles and my cousins and my dad and all the Black male friends and cool people that I know. All right, y'all. I love y'all. I'm kind of sad to see y'all, but I'll be back next Wednesday. I don't know what the topic's going to be, but if you have a topic suggestion, send me a DM and let me know. All right, y'all. Peace. Mwah. Mwah.